freedom is never really free. We yearn and strive for government, protecting our liberty.
Good evening and welcome to Your Right to Know by the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. My name is Mary Lotze and I will be your host for this evening's show. Tonight, a very special guest, and we're so honored to have Republican candidate for the U.S. Senate, Brian Herr. Thank you so much for coming to North Central Massachusetts and to Fitchburg in particular. We're very happy to have you and honored.
Well, thank you, Mary. I'm glad to be here and really looking forward to the show.
Thank you. As a way of introducing yourself to our viewers, what I'd like you to do right now is maybe spend a couple of minutes just to sort of tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, and actually what brought you to this point right now where you're running for U.S. Senate.
Sure. So I'm a first-generation American. My mom and dad came here from Ireland in the late 1950s. They came to America at a time when the promise of America was unquestionable, undeniable, and people were doing extremely well, moving their families and their children ahead for future years. I really came to this race following in their footsteps. They wanted to make a better life for themselves and for their family, and I'd like to make a better life for myself, my family, my kids' family, your kids' family, and everyone else's family for that matter.
Appreciate that.
And I'm very concerned about where we are in the country today. Just real quick, I have a bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering. I've been working in the private sector for 30 years in the commercial construction business, and also been elected 3 times at the local level. So I think it's very important that we take private sector thinking and import it into the public sector. If you run government more like a business, you can get more things done at lower cost to the taxpayers, and I think move us forward in a positive manner.
Well, it's interesting that you also come from an engineering background, and I look at that as science. And I'm sure you've met Roseanne Wofford. She's actually running for the Mass 3rd Congressional District. She's a chemical engineer. And we were talking about that, engineering, science, the actual, because what you look at, which we don't seem to have a lot of now in Washington, Boston for that matter, is people who are making change based on provable evidence, fact-based issues.
Right.
It's like, I want the hope and change. I want something. It would be nice too. Could you talk a little about how you think your background would help you go to Washington and make it a better place?
Sure. I think when you go to engineering school and you study for 4 or 5 years, I went 5 years at the University of Pittsburgh, and you study engineering, you're trained to think in a certain manner, and I think very sequentially, and I think in a very logic-oriented processes. And if you look at Washington, D.C., and you think about some of the decisions that are made there and how they are made and when they are made, the timing of those decisions, there's not a lot of logic to some of the stuff that goes on. And anybody can see that. Everybody sees that. As I move my way across the state, I talk to people from all walks of life across the entire political spectrum, and people on the far left, the center, and the far right. They look at Washington, D.C., and they see the dysfunction. And they're very frustrated by it, and they're very concerned about it, as am I, my wife, my kids, and everybody else that we talk to. So we're in this race because we believe there's a better way. I think that my background in the private sector, along with that engineering degree, creates a different mindset, and that mindset I think can be very helpful to move our country forward. I used it in Hopkinton, where I'm an elected official. 3 times I've been elected there in Hopkinton, and we changed the mindset down there, and it does work. You can run governments like private sector businesses, and you can get things done without raising taxes every time to solve the problem.
This is the first time, obviously, you've been on our show, Your Right to Know, but I happen to know because I've been out and about with you different times. You have been all over North Central Massachusetts. You were in Shirley, you were in Leominster, you were in Fitchburg, you were in Rutland, you were in Orange and Athol. So you've been out and about to many different places in North Central Massachusetts. Sure. And one of the things you talked about, the commonality between the small rural communities when you speak to people and the more medium-sized cities like Fitchburg and Leominster, people talk to you. And you mentioned once when you and I were talking that there's a common factor that the people tell you, whether it's from the larger cities or the smaller communities. What are their concerns?
Without question, the economy and the ability to get a good paying job in an economy that's moving forward is one of the top concerns that the people of North Central Massachusetts have, and I think for good reason they have that concern. You know, I see across the state a couple of different economies, and I think that's something that we have to address. As representing the people of Massachusetts in the United States Senate, I will represent all the people of Massachusetts in the United States Senate, those that live inside 495, those that live outside 495, those that vote for me and those that don't vote for me. I will still go to Washington, D.C. to represent everybody, and sometimes I don't think that that necessarily takes place, whether it be on Beacon Hill, but we're talking about the U.S. Senate, or in Washington, D.C.
I think there's a mindset of politics in Massachusetts, state and national level, that business stops at 495.
Yeah.
That we, the little people west of 495, right out through the Berkshires, just don't matter to Boston or to Washington. We very seldom see our Congress people, we seldom see our representatives. Can you speak to going around and about and some of the things? Because I know you've talked about not only listening to the people, listening to their concerns, but you said you learn from them.
Absolutely, yeah. Some politicians come into these races and they behave and they speak as if they know everything. And I don't know everything. If there's anything we learn as we get older in life is that we don't know everything, and we have to become better listeners to be better leaders and better facilitators. As I move around the state, and so I live literally right on 495. I live 2 miles west of 495. So I live outside 495. Granted, it's 2 miles west of 495. I can get anywhere in Massachusetts within an hour and a half, anywhere. I was out in Pittsfield the other night, hour and a half. I was in Orleans the week before that, hour and a half. So I can get anywhere in Massachusetts. And what I do as I travel around and listen to people is listen to their concerns. And without question, here in North Central Massachusetts, people are very concerned about the ability to get jobs. And not just a job that allows them to support and raise a family. And I think that's a reasonable expectation of our economy. And we have to have a government that understands how the economy works in a real world so that they can put policies and procedures and legislation in place to support that. The thing that frustrates me about Washington, D.C., one of the things that frustrates me about Washington, D.C., is we have people in office. Mr. Markey, for example, the gentleman I'm running against, he's been in office for 40 years, literally 40 years. He's been in Washington, D.C. He hasn't worked in Massachusetts. He doesn't work in the Massachusetts economy. He doesn't understand that the construction business inside 495 is booming and the construction business outside 495 is not. He doesn't understand that life sciences and biomed and things like that are doing extremely well in certain aspects or places in Massachusetts, but they're not doing well in other places in Massachusetts. So I think it's critically important that we have people that understand Massachusetts, that listen to the voters of Massachusetts, but also understand what the real world's all about to go to Washington. How do you pass legislation in Washington that impacts the people of Massachusetts if you don't understand what that's going to do here at home? And I think that's a big difference right now between myself and Mr. Markey.
Well, and you're sent to Washington to represent us,
Absolutely.
Not to represent yourself
That's
or,
correct.
dare say, your party.
That's correct.
And we are a totally democratic state, and I think far too often when you look at their voting records, they represent their party and not the people who voted them.
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. I said, I will represent everybody that votes in Massachusetts, whether they vote or not. I will represent those that vote for me and those that don't, without question in Washington, D.C. today, whether it's a U.S. Senator or a U.S. member of the House of Representatives, they vote for the party that put them in power. And I think that is disingenuous to the people of the United States and certainly to Massachusetts.
Right now in our national politics, at our national level, we have many, many problems. A nuclear Iran, potentially. We've got Russia and Putin annexing free land. We've got a lack of progress in the Senate. The national debt is outrageous, 17 trillion. That certainly is a national security issue in itself. We've got national security and border security. All of these are just massive issues, and we are not addressing them. How do you see any of these issues, all of these issues? Are they something that you feel have to address or prioritize? How do you see it going to Washington?
Well, as you look into Washington, and again, no matter where you are on the spectrum right now in Massachusetts, and you look towards Washington, D.C., you see that dysfunction. You see all the issues you just mentioned there, and several more. You know, you've got the VA situation, you've got the EPA situation, some of the rules and regulations coming out of the bureaucracy that the leadership doesn't even get involved in anymore, which is wrong. What I think is obvious to all is that there is a clear lack of leadership, and to some extent, just good old-fashioned lack of management now in our government. You know, it used to be one thing, we talk a lot about leadership in Washington, D.C., and the need for leadership. Well, not only do we need leadership today, but because the leadership has been lacking for so long, and I'm talking a couple of decades to some extent, you've also got a lack of management. The VA and those problems there at the VA, it's just management 101. They're not getting the job done. The situation with the IRS and employees going off and doing things outside the charter of the IRS is poor management. They're not getting the job done. There's a lot of things that are going on inside Washington that are a direct result of a lack of leadership, a lack of understanding of how to lead, and then a lack of management. The President of the United States, with all due respect, he never managed any organization in his life before he became the President of the United States. And the millions of people in the workforce, in the federal workforce. That's a problem, I think, today. And I think the same happens with our Senate candidates. With respect to foreign diplomacy and all the challenges around the world, you know, recently in the White House, the word tranquility was used. They said, okay, in our tranquil world today, and this is in the last 10 days, in our tranquil world today, blah, blah, blah. What tranquility is there? We have all kinds of very serious issues around the globe, the situation in Iran, the situation in Iraq, the situation in Ukraine. All these problems are a direct result of an approach to governing and an approach to foreign diplomacy and foreign policy in America that it is, frankly, to use the term in another way, is foreign to so many people in our country. We don't understand what the foreign policy is in the United States of America today, and we don't understand the mantra and the message that the administration is putting forward. And I think the U.S. Senate, through the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, and many others in Washington need to be weighing in on this and trying to establish a more cohesive, clear, and concise foreign policy plan for America.
You know, when you talked about tranquility and I think of the foreign policy, I think of the individual who you're running against, Mr. Markey. And interesting, he's only been in the Senate now since June of 2013. He replaced, for viewers who may not remember, he replaced Senator John Kerry when he was elevated to the Secretary of State. His very first vote, or one of his first votes, was on the Syria. And he voted present. And even his liberal base, now Senator Kerry, formerly Representative Kerry, was always known as one of the more strong, staunch liberal politicians. But even his liberal base, NPR, the senator who dodged the Syria vote, this is Boston Magazine. Ed Markey annoys literally everyone with that vote. NBC, hardly a profile encouraged the New Republic, spineless vote. Now, that to me talks about governance, especially in the state of Massachusetts, that does look at what's happening out there as tranquil, that they don't have to be energized or responsive to. And what do you think of taking a vote and saying present?
Well, Mr. Markey's been in Washington, D.C. for 38 years. And in those 38 years, he says he has garnered an incredible amount of experience. And he's been very effective at passing all kinds of legislation. And it's one of the most important reasons why the people of Massachusetts should consider sending him back, is because of all that experience. If he has all that experience, why is he voting present on a very serious question? There were good arguments being made on both sides of that question. There were people that were saying we need to go and we need to act because of what happened with Assad and what he did to his own people. And there were people saying we can't be the world's police, we can't engage in all these different entanglements, it'll only drag us further into the problems of the Middle East. Good arguments on both sides. Every person weighed in on it in that Senate Foreign Relations Committee hearing room except Senator Markey. He was the only one to vote present. He voted present, I think, for two reasons. One, perhaps because of some of the comments made there, but also, I believe, because he had another election coming up in very short order. He didn't want to alienate the President of the United States, who was pushing for action, and he didn't want to alienate the people of Massachusetts, who by and large don't believe we should be the world's police. So he was playing the politics of re-election.
Sure.
His first priority was, what do I answer? How do I answer this so that I can get re-elected?
Right.
He wasn't sent there to get re-elected. He was sent there to represent the people of Massachusetts. And that is what's so wrong with politics in Washington today. I think it's a great example of it, an unfortunate example of it, actually. But it's so obvious what's going on in Washington. Their first and foremost, their objective is to get reelected and keep their job. And I don't think that should be the case at all. That's why I'm a big believer in term limits.
Oh, that's a good one. That's
Yeah,
a good
big-
one. A lot of
big
people
believer.
feel that way. And this actually is a good segue into another thought, is that Congress has a very low approval rating. I think it's somewhere like under 17% or maybe even closer to 10%.
I heard 13 recently,
Yeah,
which
it's
is
really not
too
very
bad,
good.
yeah.
So, but why do people, especially in Massachusetts, but it's nationwide, continue to re-elect the same people into office, even ones who by their own friends have been called spineless, who never come out to this part of Massachusetts? I would dare say, as you drove out from Hopkinton today, Mr. Markey would probably need to tune in his GPS to find out where Fitchburg is. Why do we continue? What is the mentality that we continue to vote in the same people and do not allow fresh blood, fresh ideas, new thought, people who are willing to bring in term limits to the picture?
Well, we talk a lot in Massachusetts, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it during this election cycle, and I know that Senator Warren has spoken about it in the past, and we'll talk about it again in the future. We talk a lot about economic inequality and economic greed. I believe there's a higher form of greed in America today that is creating the other greeds that we talk about and we are concerned about. It's called political greed. There is a mindset, there's a political greed in the ruling class, if you will, of American politicians today, in the incumbents, that I think is really setting the tone and setting the direction for some of the other problems that we have with greedy behavior in our society. Political greed is this mindset that the politicians have, the incumbents have today. How dare you run against me? How dare you question, my votes? How dare you suggest that the party should rise up and put somebody else forward? Why would we ever need fresh ideas and new energy? Why would we do those things? The political greed drives a thought process that is unhealthy for our democracy. And I think that's exactly what happens right now in America today. It's been going on for quite some time. It's not just with Mr. Markey. He's an obvious example of it, being there for almost 40 years now. But there are many others, and it's a system that's been created. The power of incumbency is very difficult to overcome. We understand that in this race. It's going to be very difficult for us to overcome Mr. Markey's power of incumbency.
How do you do it?
But we can do it. We can get it done.
And how do you get your message out? What is the number one way to get your message out? I mean, you go to towns, you go to cities, you shake hands in coffee shops and town fairs. What is the best way of doing that? Is it truly grassroots?
We do all of that, and then we do it 1,000 times more or 10,000 times more between now and November 4th. We have to do a grassroots organization. We've got to do things like shows like this that will touch more people at one time. We've got to do things through the print media. We've got to do things running ads on television. There's all kinds of things that we can do, but most importantly, what we need to do is say to the people of Massachusetts, if you like what's going on in Washington, D.C. today, if you're comfortable with the direction of our country, if you're comfortable with our economy, if you're comfortable with your job and you're comfortable with the job that your kids are going to get when they graduate from high school or college, and you're comfortable with all that, then you have made your decision. Go with what you know. If you are not comfortable with those things, if you're concerned about your daughter's ability to get a job out of college like I am, I have a 21-year-old daughter who's going to be a senior in college this year. She's been fortunate to go to a nice school. That school is going to graduate her, but is she going to be able to get a job and pay back some of the loans that she's going to have? Everyone has a few loans coming out of college these days. Is she going to be able to sustain herself as an adult in our society? Those kinds of those scenarios replay themselves over and over every day. So if you're comfortable with what's going on, you go this direction. If you're not, and you're concerned about your kids, you're concerned about yourself, you're concerned about your income, those sorts of things, you're concerned about our foreign policy, and you're concerned about the direction of America, then there's a different choice. The people of Massachusetts can take a different look at a different candidate in 2014.
How do you wake up the youth vote? The youth vote is lockstep in sort of a liberal fashion. And yet, in many ways, they're the #1 group of people who are negatively impacted by the Democratic policies.
Yeah. I in talking with my daughter and some of the kids in college today and her friends and others and my high school daughter's friends and so forth, the kids, the youth of America, I think, recognize now that they want to either go to school, they want to go to trade school, they want to get a job out of high school or college, wherever it is. And they're concerned that they can actually get that done. And they don't want to necessarily go to some place and work in a fast food restaurant. They want to get a job with some meaning. They want to have a career. And they're worried that those careers don't exist today. And they're worried that the people in Washington and on Beacon Hill to some extent, but certainly Washington as we talk about federal politics and the federal government, they're concerned that the people in Washington, D.C. don't understand what it's like in this real world that we all live in. So I think the youth of Massachusetts and the youth of America are starting to recognize that we just can't always say we're going to fix the problem by raising taxes and raise the national debt and raise the debt ceiling and just sort of keep kicking the can down the road. I think the youth of America recognize that they've got to start making some different choices. And we are offering a different choice for the people of Massachusetts this year that has a proven track record. I mean, I went into Hopkinton as a selectman and said, folks, we got to run it more like a business. We got to stop just taking money from the taxpayers at the Prop 2.5 level and spending that money just because we can. Let's just invest them. Let's start to invest the money in ways where we see a return for the taxpayers. And people said, we can't do that here, Brian. That's not how we do things at municipal government. That's not how we did it last year. That's not how we budgeted the year before. No, we have to do it the way we've always done it. I said, no, we don't. Let's try a different approach. And we took a different approach. We stopped raising taxes 2.5% every year because we were allowed to. We started raising taxes only when we needed to. A couple of years we didn't need to. We built up what's called an excess levy, and then we had an underride on our ballot this year. So we ran our local government with the mindset that I'm talking about, that the federal government needs to operate under, and it worked. And I think if we can convince the youth of America, the moms and dads of America, the grandparents of America, that there's a different way to get things done and still provide services that we all know we need to keep our society moving forward. And government has a role in that process. If we can show them there's a different approach, we can get things done.
Youth needing jobs when they get out, you speak to people, jobs, employment, security, that they have a future, a financial future. Going to Washington, how do you think you can make changes to areas in north central Massachusetts, areas that have just dark main streets? Many people have left, closed up, boarded up Main Street. Factories, businesses are gone and moving out. How do you think from Washington you could help revitalize this area of Massachusetts or the complete Massachusetts?
Yeah, I think one of the things we have to do is we have to put policies in place that will actually create opportunities in the states in which we represent. So I'm there representing the people of Massachusetts. We have to put policies and we have to put legislation in place that will help people in Massachusetts move forward. The way to do that, I think, especially here in north central Massachusetts outside of 495, is take some of the things that are going on inside 495 and just shift them west 45, 50, 60 miles. You know, we've got a lot going on in the life sciences inside 495. Why can't we bring some of those opportunities out to the central part of Massachusetts? We've got great institutions in Boston in cancer research at Dana-Farber, Mass General Hospital, Brigham and Women's, you name it, all those life sciences and hospitals and organizations like that. They can create satellite operations out here. Thousands, millions of people still live west of 495 in Massachusetts. They need health care. They need educational institutions. They need all kinds of other things that satellites could come out and create. We could create satellites out here. I know folks that go from Fitchburg into Boston for treatments, you know, for healthcare issues. I know people from Leominster that go into Boston or go to Cambridge to do certain things. If we had satellite operations out here, and that has been done. You've seen that happen along 495. I haven't seen it come too far west.
Is it done through tax incentives and things like that? Is that what
yeah,
it would
I think you
typically
can
be
do
done?
that. There's two ways you can do it. You can do tax incentives, local tax incentives, and we've done some of that in our local community. Sometimes they work. Sometimes they don't.
Yeah.
When they work, it's great. If they don't work, you have to hold those organizations, you have to keep their feet to the fire, and you've got to say, well, you said you're going to create 30 jobs out here. okay, we gave you a tax incentive for the last 4 years, you didn't create those jobs, you owe us 300 grand, and you have to ask them to pay up. And we've done that. Again, if you run government like a business, you make people honor their commitments to the community, you can get things done. Either get it done through job creation or get it done through them paying the taxes back so we can invest that money elsewhere to create other jobs. There's ways to do it with TIFs. But the other thing I think that's an opportunity, not only for Massachusetts, but for America, is we've got a lot of our corporations, got a lot of our big companies, and I know some of them because I work in that world, that have gone overseas. And they've taken operations and they've taken jobs and they've taken money overseas to get away from the tax burdens of the United States of America. If we can convince those companies to come back to America, come back to our shores, come back to Massachusetts and open up operations or reestablish operations here and put in jobs and create jobs and maintain those jobs and create that engine of economy through that operation, if we do that and we give them tax incentives to come back from overseas by what we would do like in tax incentives going from Fitchburg to Hopkinton or Hopkinton to Marlborough or what have you, if we did that with our corporations overseas coming back, we could also create some opportunity outside, you know, the traditional 495 belt where we need some land and we need some space to get things done.
Believe it or not, we're coming to a close. Our show is almost over.
They go very fast, they really do.
But what I'd like to do is give you a minute to speak right to that camera and to all the viewers and tell them why we should elect Brian Herr.
Great. Well, thank you, Mary. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. I've enjoyed our conversation. To the folks of North Central Massachusetts, my name is Brian Herr. I'm running for United States Senate here in Massachusetts against Ed Markey this fall. I'm a first-generation American. My mom and dad came here from Ireland. They built a great life for themselves and for their children. I'd like to see us a country where we can do that again. I worry about the direction of our country today. I worry about the future of my children and Mary's kids and grandkids and everybody else's out there in Massachusetts. There's an opportunity this year to choose to make a different choice, not only for Massachusetts, but for the United States of America. We have proven to the people of Metro West here in Massachusetts that if you run government like a private sector business, if you invest intelligently and wisely, you can get things done without raising taxes all the time and putting undue burdens on homeowners and families. We've got to do those kinds of things, take a different approach so that we can have economic prosperity and opportunities for all of Massachusetts in 2014 and beyond. I really would appreciate your support and a vote this fall come November. Thank you.
And I have to say to all of our viewers that Brian Herr has the absolute best slogan, campaign slogan, and it is,
come November, please remember, don't vote for him, vote for her.
And would you like to tell our viewers as a final note where that came from?
I have 5 children, so I know a lot about kids and parents and all. I have 5 kids, and my youngest daughter said, we were talking a couple years back, Daddy, why would they vote for him when they can vote for her? You're a her, not a him. And she just kind of went back and forth with this who's on first thing. And we had a nice little dialogue about it. I looked at her and go, I could use that someday. So there we are. Don't vote for him, vote for her.
I think your daughter has a future in Madison Avenue.
She may be a great marketing person someday. Her mother would like that to be the case.
Thank you so much for coming in. And as we close, we'd like to thank you for watching Your Right to Know and sitting in with the Fitchburg Republican City Committee. As we leave you, we'd want you to remember that your local city and town Republican Committee is your only grassroots organization that supports and holds dear your constitutional and conservative values. We encourage you to join your local committee or just attend. And why? Because to us, the Grand Old Party, or the GOP, stands for growth, opportunity, and prosperity, and because we always stand for freedom. Thank you and good night.
America, we stand for freedom. So let us all unite to yearn and strive for our republic that reflects our values, that preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and might, that reflects our values and preserves our rights, and goes forth in power and